Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 1. Narrated by Abu Huraira, I heard Allah's Apostle, p.b.u.h, saying, we, Muslims, are the last, to come, but, will be, the foremost on the day of resurrection, though the former nations were given the holy scriptures before us. And this was their day, Friday, the celebration of which was made compulsory for them, but they differed about it. So Allah gave us the guidance for it, Friday, and all the other people are behind us in this respect. The Jews, holy day is, tomorrow, i.e. Saturday, and the Christians, is, the day after tomorrow, i.e. Sunday. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 2. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, Allah's Apostle, p.b.u.h, said, any one of you attending the Friday prayers should take a bath. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 3. Narrated by Ibn Umar, while Umar bin al-Khattab was standing and delivering the sermon on a Friday, one of the companions of the Prophet, who was one of the foremost muhajirs, emigrants, came. Umar said to him, what is the time now? He replied, I was busy and could not go back to my house till I heard the adhan. I did not perform more than the ablution. Thereupon Umar said to him, did you perform only the ablution, although you know that Allah's Apostle, p.b.u.h, used to order us to take a bath on Fridays? Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 4. Narrated by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, Allah's Apostle, p.b.u.h, said, the taking of a bath on Friday is compulsory for every male, Muslim, who has attained the age of puberty. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 5. Narrated by Abu Sa'id, I testify that Allah's Apostle said, the taking of a bath on Friday is compulsory for every male Muslim who has attained the age of puberty, and, also, the cleaning of his teeth with siwak, and the using of perfume if it is available. Amr, a sub-narrator, said, I confirm that the taking of a bath is compulsory, but as for the siwak and the using of perfume, Allah knows better whether it is obligatory or not, but according to the hadith it is as above. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 6. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's Apostle, p.b.u.h, said, any person who takes a bath on Friday like the bath of Janaba and then goes for the prayer, in the first hour, i.e. early, it is as if he had sacrificed a camel, in Allah's cause, and whoever goes in the second hour it is as if he had sacrificed a cow, and whoever goes in the third hour, then it is as if he had sacrificed a horned ram, and if one goes in the fourth hour, then it is as if he had sacrificed a hen, and whoever goes in the fifth hour then it is as if he had offered an egg. When the Imam comes out, i.e. starts delivering the khutbah, the angels present themselves to listen to the khutbah. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 7. Narrated by Abu Huraira, while Umar bin al-Khattab was delivering the khutbah on a Friday, a man entered the mosque. Umar asked him, what has detained you from the prayer? The man said, it was only that when I heard the adhan I performed ablution for the prayer. On that Umar said, did you not hear the Prophet saying, any one of you going out for the Jumu'ah prayer should take a bath? Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 8. Narrated by Salman al-Farsi, the Prophet, p.b.u.h, said, whoever takes a bath on Friday, purifies himself as much as he can, then uses his hair, oil or perfumes himself with the scent of his house, then proceeds for the Jumu'ah prayer, and does not separate two persons sitting together in the mosque, then prays as much as Allah has written for him and then remains silent while the Imam is delivering the khutbah, his sins in between the present and the last Friday would be forgiven. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 9. Narrated by Taus, I said to Ibn Abbas, the people are narrating that the Prophet said, take a bath on Friday and wash your heads, i.e. take a thorough bath, even though you were not junub, and use perfume. On that Ibn Abbas replied, I know about the bath, i.e. it is essential, but I do not know about the perfume, i.e. whether it is essential or not. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 10. Narrated by Taus, Ibn Abbas mentioned the statement of the Prophet regarding the taking of a bath on Friday, and then I asked him whether the Prophet, p.b.u.h, had ordered perfume or hair oil to be used if they could be found in one's house. He, Ibn Abbas, replied that he did not know about it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 11. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, Umar bin al-Khattab saw a silken cloak, being sold, at the gate of the mosque, and said to Allah's apostle, I wish you would buy this to wear on Fridays and also on occasions of the arrivals of the delegations. Allah's apostle replied, this will be worn by a person who will have no share, reward, in the hereafter. Later on similar cloaks were given to Allah's apostle, and he gave one of them to Umar bin al-Khattab. On that Umar said, O Allah's apostle, you have given me this cloak, although on the cloak of Adarid, a cloak merchant who was selling that silken cloak at the gate of the mosque, you passed such and such a remark. Allah's apostle replied, I have not given you this to wear. And so Umar bin al-Khattab gave it to his pagan brother in Mecca to wear. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 12. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's apostle said, if I had not found it hard for my followers or the people, I would have ordered them to clean their teeth with siwak for every prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 13. Narrated by Anas, Allah's apostle, I said, I have told you repeatedly to use the siwak. The Prophet put emphasis on the use of the siwak. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 14. Narrated by Hudhaifa, when the Prophet, p.b.u.h, got up at night, for the night prayer, he used to clean his mouth. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 15. Narrated by Aisha, Abdurrahman bin Abi Bakr came holding a siwak with which he was cleaning his teeth. Allah's apostle looked at him. I requested Abdurrahman to give the siwak to me, and after he gave it to me I divided it, chewed it, and gave it to Allah's apostle. Then he cleaned his teeth with it, and, at that time, he was resting against my chest. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 16. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet used to recite the following in the Fajr prayer of Friday, Alif, Lam, Mim, Tanzil, Surat as-Sajd number 32, and Halat al-Insani, i.e. Surah ad-Dar number 76. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 17. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, the first Jumu'ah prayer which was offered after a Jumu'ah prayer offered at the Mosque of Allah's Apostle took place in the Mosque of the tribe of Abdul Qais at Jawaidi in Bahrain. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 18. Narrated by Ibn Umar, I heard Allah's Apostle saying, all of you are guardians. Yunus said, Razak bin Hukaim wrote to Ibn Shihab while I was with him at Wadi al-Qura saying, shall I lead the Jumu'ah prayer? Razak was working on the land, I.e. farming, and there was a group of Sudanese people and some others with him. Razak was then the governor of Ayla. Ibn Shihab wrote, to Razak, ordering him to lead the Jumu'ah prayer and telling him that Salim told him that Abdullah bin Umar had said, "I heard Allah's apostle saying, all of you are guardians and responsible for your wards and the things under your care. The Imam, i.e. ruler, is the guardian of his subjects and is responsible for them, and a man is the guardian of his family and is responsible for them. A woman is the guardian of her husband's house and is responsible for it. A servant is the guardian of his master's belongings and is responsible for them." I thought that he also said, "A man is the guardian of his father's property and is responsible for it. All of you are guardians and responsible for your wards and the things under your care." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 19. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, I heard Allah's apostle saying, "Any one of you coming for the Jumu'ah prayer should take a bath." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 20. Narrated by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, Allah's apostle said, "The taking of a bath on Friday is compulsory for every Muslim who has attained the age of puberty." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 21. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's apostle said, "We are the last to come amongst the nations, but will be the foremost on the day of resurrection. They were given the Holy Scripture before us and we were given the Quran after them. And this was the day, Friday, about which they differed, and Allah gave us the guidance for that. So tomorrow, i.e. Saturday, is the Jews' day, and the day after tomorrow, i.e. Sunday, is the Christians." The Prophet, p.b.u.h, remained silent for a while, and then said, "It is obligatory for every Muslim that he should take a bath once in 7 days, when he should wash his head and body." Narrated Abu Huraira. Through different narrators that the Prophet said, "It is Allah's right on every Muslim that he should take a bath, at least, once in 7 days." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 22. Narrated by Ibn Umar, the Prophet, p.b.u.h, said, "Allow women to go to the mosques at night." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 23. Narrated by Ibn Umar, one of the wives of Umar bin al-Khattab used to offer the Fajr and the Isha prayer in congregation in the mosque. She was asked why she had come out for the prayer, as she knew that Umar disliked it, and he has great gara, self-respect. She replied, "What prevents him from stopping me from this act?" The other replied, "The statement of Allah's apostle, p.b.u.h, do not stop Allah's women slave from going to Allah's mosques, prevents him." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 24. Narrated by Muhammad bin Sirin, on a rainy day Ibn Abbas said to his mu'adhin, after saying, "Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, I testify that Muhammad is Allah's apostle," do not say Ya Allah's salad, come for the prayer, but say pray in your houses. The man did so. But the people disliked it. Ibn Abbas said, "It was done by one who was much better than I, i.e. the Prophet, p.b.u.h. No doubt, the Jumu'ah prayer is compulsory, but I dislike to put you to task by bringing you out walking in mud and slush." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 25. Narrated by Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, the people used to come from their abodes and from Al-Awali, i.e. outskirts of Medina, up to a distance of 4 miles or more from Medina. They used to pass through dust and used to be drenched with sweat and covered with dust, so sweat used to trickle from them. One of them came to Allah's apostle, who was in my house. The Prophet said to him, "I wish that you keep yourself clean on this day of yours, i.e. take a bath." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 26. Narrated by Yahya bin Said, I asked Amra about taking a bath on Fridays. She replied, Aisha said, the people used to work, for their livelihood, and whenever they went for the Jumu'ah prayer, they used to go to the mosque in the same shape as they had been in work. So they were asked to take a bath on Friday. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 27. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, the Prophet used to offer the Jumu'ah prayer immediately after midday. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 28. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, we used to offer the Jumu'ah prayer early and then have an afternoon nap. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 29. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, the Prophet used to offer the prayer earlier if it was very cold, and if it was very hot he used to delay the prayer, i.e. the Jumu'ah prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 30. Narrated by Abu Abs, I heard the Prophet saying, anyone whose feet are covered with dust in Allah's cause, shall be saved by Allah from the hellfire. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 31. Narrated by Abu Huraira, heard Allah's apostles, p.b.u.h, saying, if the prayer is started do not run for it but just walk for it calmly and pray whatever you get, and complete whatever is missed. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 32. Narrated by Abdullah bin Abi Qatada, on the authority of his father. The Prophet, p.b.u.h, said, do not stand up, for prayer, unless you see me, and observe calmness and solemnity. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 33. Narrated by Salman al-Farsi, Allah's Apostle, p.b.u.h, said, anyone who takes a bath on Friday and cleans himself as much as he can and puts oil on his hair, or scents himself, and then proceeds for the prayer and does not force his way between two persons, assembled in the mosque for the Friday prayer, and prays as much as is written for him and remains quiet. When the Imam delivers the khutbah, all his sins in between the present and the last Friday will be forgiven. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 34. Narrated by Ibn Jurayy, I heard Nazi saying, Ibn Umar, said, the Prophet forbade that a man should make another man to get up to sit in his place. I said to Nafi, is it for Jumu'ah prayer only? He replied, for Jumu'ah prayer and any other prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 35. Narrated by As-Sa'ib bin Yazid, in the lifetime of the Prophet, Abu Bakr and Umar, the adhan for the Jumu'ah prayer used to be pronounced when the Imam sat on the pulpit. But during the Caliphate of Uthman, when the Muslims increased in number, a third adhan at Az-Zara was added. Abu Abdullah said, Az-Zara is a place in the market of Medina. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 36. Narrated by As-Sa'ib bin Yazid, the person who increased the number of adhans for the Jumu'ah prayers to 3 was Uthman bin Affan, and it was when the number of the Muslim people of Medina had increased. In the lifetime of the Prophet there was only one mu'adhin, and the adhan used to be pronounced only after the Imam had taken his seat, i.e. on the pulpit. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 37. Narrated by Abu Umama bin Sal bin Hunayf, I heard Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan repeating the statements of the adhan, while he was sitting on the pulpit. When the mu'adhin pronounced the adhan saying, Allahu Akbar, Muawiyah said, Allah Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And when the mu'adhin said, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, I testify that none has the right to be worshipped but Allah, Muawiyah said, and so do I. When he said, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, I testify that Muhammad is Allah's apostle, Muawiyah said, and, so do I. When the adhan was finished, Muawiyah said, O people, when the muaddin pronounced the adhan, I heard Allah's apostle on this very pulpit saying what you have just heard me saying. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 38. Narrated by As-Sa'ib bin Yazid IA, Uthman bin Affan introduced the second adhan on Fridays when the number of the people in the mosque increased. Previously the adhan on Fridays used to be pronounced only after the imam had taken his seat on the pulpit. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 39. Narrated by Az-Zuhri, I heard As-Sa'ib bin Yazid saying, in the lifetime of Allah's apostle, and Abu Bakr and Umar, the adhan for the Jumu'ah prayer used to be pronounced after the imam had taken his seat on the pulpit. But when the people increased in number during the caliphate of Uthman, he introduced a third adhan on Friday for the Jumu'ah prayer, and it was pronounced at Az-Zuhri, and that new state of affairs remained so in the succeeding years. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 40. Narrated by Abu Hazim bin Dinar, some people went to Sahl bin Sa'd as Sa'id and told him that they had different opinions regarding the wood of the pulpit. They asked him about it, and he said, By Allah, I know of what wood the pulpit was made, and no doubt I saw it on thy very first day when Allah's apostle I took his seat on it. Allah's apostle sent for such and such an Ansari woman, and Sahl mentioned her name, and said to her, Order your slave carpenter to prepare for me some pieces of wood, i.e. pulpit, on which I may sit at the time of addressing the people. So she ordered her slave carpenter, and he made it from the tamarisk of the forest and brought it to the woman. The woman sent that pulpit to Allah's apostle, who ordered it to be placed here. Then I saw Allah's apostle praying on it and then bowed on it. Then he stepped back, got down, and prostrate on the ground near the foot of the pulpit, and again ascended the pulpit. After finishing the prayer he faced the people and said, I have done this so that you may follow me and learn the way I pray. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 41. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, the Prophet used to stand by a stem of a date palm tree, while delivering a sermon. When the pulpit was placed for him, we heard that stem crying like a pregnant she-camel till the Prophet got down from the pulpit and placed his hand over it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 42. Narrated by Salim, my father said, I heard the Prophet delivering the khutbah on the pulpit, and he said, Whoever comes for the Jumu'ah prayer should take a bath before coming. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 43. Narrated by Ibn Umar, the Prophet, p.b.u.h, used to deliver the khutbah while standing, and then he would sit, then stand again as you do nowadays. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 44. Narrated by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, one day the Prophet sat on the pulpit and we sat around him. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 45. Narrated by Amr bin Taqlib, some property or something was brought to Allah's apostle and he distributed it. He gave to some men and ignored the others. Later he got the news of his being admonished by those whom he had ignored. So he glorified and praised Allah and said, Amma bi'adu. By Allah, I may give to a man and ignore another, although the one whom I ignore is more beloved to me than the one whom I give. But I give to some people as I feel that they have no patience and no contentment in their hearts, and I leave those who are patient and self-contented with the goodness and wealth which Allah has put into their hearts, and Amr bin Taqlib is one of them. Amr added, By Allah, those words of Allah's apostle are more beloved to me than the best red camels. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 46. Narrated by Aisha, once in the middle of the night Allah's apostle, p.b.u.h, went out and prayed in the mosque and some men prayed with him. The next morning the people spoke about it and so more people gathered and prayed with him, in the second night. They circulated the news in the morning, and so, on the third night the number of people increased greatly. Allah's apostle, p.b.u.h, came out and they prayed behind him. On the fourth night the mosque was overwhelmed by the people till it could not accommodate them. Allah's apostle came out only for the Fajr prayer, and when he finished the prayer, he faced the people and recited Tashahhud, I testify that none has the right to be worshipped but Allah and that Muhammad is his apostle, and then said, Amma ba'du. Verily your presence, in the mosque at night, was not hidden from me, but I was afraid that this prayer of tahajjud, might be made compulsory and you might not be able to carry it out. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 47. Narrated by Abu Hamid as Said, one night Allah's apostle, p.b.u.h, stood up after the prayer and recited Tashahhud and then praised Allah as he deserved and said, Amma ba'du. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 48. Narrated by Al-Miswar bin Makrama, once Allah's apostle got up for delivering the khutbah and I heard him after Tashahhud saying Amma ba'du. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 49. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, once the Prophet ascended the pulpit and it was the last gathering in which he took part. He was covering his shoulder with a big cloak and binding his head with an oily bandage. He glorified and praised Allah and said, O people! Come to me. So the people came and gathered around him and he then said, Amma ba'du. From now onward the ангիր will decrease and other people will increase. So anybody who becomes a ruler of the followers of Muhammad and has the power to harm or benefit people, then he should accept the good from the benevolent amongst them, ангիր, and overlook the faults of their wrongdoers. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 50. Narrated by Abdullah ibn Umar, the Prophet used to deliver 2 khutbahs and sit in between them. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 51. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, when it is a Friday, the angels stand at the gate of the mosque and keep on writing the names of the persons coming to the mosque in succession according to their arrivals. The example of the one who enters the mosque in the earliest hour is that of one offering a camel, in sacrifice. The one coming next is like one offering a cow and then a ram and then a chicken and then an egg respectively. When the Imam comes out, for Jumu'ah prayer, they, i.e. angels, fold their papers and listen to the khutbah. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 52. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, a person entered the mosque while the Prophet was delivering the khutbah on a Friday. The Prophet said to him, Have you prayed? The man replied in the negative. The Prophet said, Get up and pray 2 rakat. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 53. Narrated by Jabir, a man entered the mosque while the Prophet was delivering the khutbah. The Prophet said to him, Have you prayed? The man replied in the negative. The Prophet said, Pray 2 rakat. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 54. Narrated by Anas, while the Prophet was delivering the khutbah on a Friday, a man stood up and said, O Allah's apostle! The livestock and the sheep are dying, so pray to Allah for rain. So he, the Prophet, raised both his hands and invoked Allah for it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 55. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, once in the lifetime of the Prophet, p.b.u.h, the people were afflicted with drought, famine. While the Prophet was delivering the khutbah on a Friday, a Bedouin stood up and said, "O Allah's Apostle! Our possessions are being destroyed and the children are hungry, please invoke Allah for rain." So the Prophet raised his hands. At that time there was not a trace of cloud in the sky. By him in whose hands my soul is, as soon as he lowered his hands, clouds gathered like mountains, and before he got down from the pulpit, I saw the rain falling on the beard of the Prophet. It rained that day, the next day, the third day, the fourth day till the next Friday. The same Bedouin or another man stood up and said, "O Allah's Apostle! The houses have collapsed, our possessions and livestock have been drowned, please invoke Allah to protect us." So the Prophet I raised both his hands and said, "O Allah! Round about us and not on us." So, in whatever direction he pointed with his hands, the clouds dispersed and cleared away, and Medina's sky became clear as a hole in between the clouds. The valley of Qanat remained flooded. For 1 month, none came from outside but talked about the abundant rain. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 56. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's Apostle, p.b.u.h, said, "When the Imam is delivering the khutbah, and you ask your companion to keep quiet and listen, then no doubt you have done an evil act." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 57. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's Apostle, p.b.u.h, talked about Friday and said, "There is an hour, opportune time, on Friday, and if a Muslim gets it while praying and asks something from Allah, then Allah will definitely meet his demand." And he, the Prophet, pointed out the shortness of that time with his hands. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 58. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, while we were praying, Jamua Khutbah and prayer, with the Prophet, p.b.u.h, some camels loaded with food arrived. From Sham the people diverted their attention towards the camels, and left the mosque, and only 12 persons remained with the Prophet. So this verse was revealed, but when they see some bargain or some amusement, they disperse headlong to it, and leave you standing. 62.11. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 59. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, Allah's Apostle used to pray 2 rakat before the Zuhr prayer and 2 rakat after it. He also used to pray 2 rakat after the Maghrib prayer in his house, and 2 rakat after the Isha prayer. He never prayed after Jamua prayer till he departed from the mosque, and then he would pray 2 rakat at home. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 60. Narrated by Sal bin Sad, there was a woman amongst us who had a farm, and she used to sow silk, a kind of vegetable, on the edges of streams in her farm. On Fridays she used to pull out the silk from its roots and put the roots in a utensil. Then she would put a handful of powdered barley over it and cook it. The roots of the silk were a substitute for meat. After finishing the Jamua prayer we used to greet her, and she would give us that food which we would eat with our hands, and because of that meal, we used to look forward to Friday. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 61. Narrated by Sal, as above with the addition, we never had an afternoon nap nor meals except after offering the Jamua prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 62. Narrated by Anas, we used to offer the Jamua prayer early and then have the afternoon nap. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 13, Hadith number 63. Narrated by Sal, we used to offer the Jamua prayer with the Prophet and then take the afternoon nap. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 14, Hadith number 64. Narrated by Shu'aib, I asked Az-Zuri, did the Prophet ever offer the fear prayer? Az-Zuri said, I was told by Salim that Abdullah bin Umar I had said, I took part in a holy battle with Allah's apostle in Najd. We faced the enemy and arranged ourselves in rows. Then Allah's apostle, P.B.U.H, stood up to lead the prayer and one party stood to pray with him while the other faced the enemy. Allah's apostle, P.B.U.H, and the former party bowed and performed 2 prostrations. Then that party left and took the place of those who had not prayed. Allah's apostle prayed 1 rak'ah, with the latter, and performed 2 prostrations and finished his prayer with taslim. Then every one of them bowed once and performed 2 prostrations individually. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 14, Hadith number 65. Narrated by Nafi, Ibn Umar said something similar to Mujahid saying, whenever Muslims and non-Muslims stand face to face in battle, the Muslims can pray while standing. Ibn Umar added, the Prophet said, if the number of the enemy is greater than the Muslims, they can pray while standing or riding, individually. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 14, Hadith number 66. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, once the Prophet, P.B.U.H, led the fear prayer and the people stood behind him. He said Takbir, Allahu Akbar, and the people said the same. He bowed and some of them bowed. Then he prostrate and they also prostrate. Then he stood for the second rak'ah and those who had prayed the first rak'ah left and guarded their brothers. The second party joined him and performed bowing and prostration with him. All the people were in prayer but they were guarding one another during the prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 14, Hadith number 67. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, on the day of the Khandak Umar came, cursing the disbelievers of Quraysh and said, O Allah's Apostle! I have not offered the Asr prayer and the sun has set. The Prophet replied, by Allah! I too, have not offered the prayer yet. The Prophet then went to Buthan, performed ablution and performed the Asr prayer after the sun had set and then offered the Maghrib prayer after it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 14, Hadith number 68. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, Allah's Apostle, P.B.U.H, offered the Fajr prayer when it was still dark, then he rode and said, Allah Akbar! Khaybar is ruined. When we approach near to a nation, the most unfortunate is the mourning of those who have been warned. The people came out into the streets saying, Muhammad and his army. Allah's apostle vanquished them by force and their warriors were killed, the children and women were taken as captives. Safiyyah was taken by Dihya al-Kalbi and later she belonged to Allah's apostle who married her and her mar was her manumission. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 69. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, Umar bought a silk cloak from the market, took it to Allah's apostle and said, O Allah's apostle! Take it and adorn yourself with it during the Eid and when the delegations visit you. Allah's apostle, P.B.U.H, replied, this dress is for those who have no share in the hereafter. After a long period Allah's apostle, P.B.U.H, sent to Umar a cloak of silk brocade. Umar came to Allah's apostle, P.B.U.H, with the cloak and said, O Allah's apostle! You said that this dress was for those who had no share in the hereafter, yet you have sent me this cloak. Allah's apostle said to him, sell it and fulfill your needs by it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 70. Narrated by Aisha, Allah's apostle, P.B.U.H, came to my house while 2 girls were singing beside me the songs of Bu'ath, a story about the war between the 2 tribes of the Ansar, the Hazraj and the Aus, before Islam. The Prophet, p.b.u.h, lay down and turned his face to the other side. Then Abu Bakr came and spoke to me harshly saying, musical instruments of Satan near the Prophet, p.b.u.h. Allah's apostle, p.b.u.h, turned his face towards him and said, leave them. When Abu Bakr became inattentive, I signaled to those girls to go out and they left. It was the day of Eid, and the black people were playing with shields and spears, so either I requested the Prophet, p.b.u.h, or he asked me whether I would like to see the display. I replied in the affirmative. Then the Prophet, p.b.u.h, made me stand behind him and my cheek was touching his cheek and he was saying, carry on. O Bani Arfida, till I got tired. The Prophet, p.b.u.h, asked me, are you satisfied, is that sufficient for you? I replied in the affirmative and he told me to leave. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 71. Narrated by Al-Bara, I heard the Prophet, p.b.u.h, delivering a khutbah saying, the first thing to be done on this day, first day of Eid al-Adha, is to pray, and after returning from the prayer we slaughter our sacrifices, in the name of Allah, and whoever does so, he acted according to our sunnah, traditions. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 72. Narrated by Aisha, Abu Bakr came to my house while two small Ansari girls were singing beside me the stories of the ангիր concerning the day of Bu'ath. And they were not singers. Abu Bakr said protestingly, musical instruments of Satan in the house of Allah's apostle. It happened on the Eid day and Allah's apostle said, O Abu Bakr, there is an Eid for every nation and this is our Eid. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 73. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, Allah's apostle never proceeded, for the prayer, on the day of Eid al-Fitr unless he had eaten some dates. Anas also narrated, the Prophet used to eat odd number of dates. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 74. Narrated by Anas, the Prophet said, whoever slaughtered his sacrifice before the Eid prayer should slaughter again. A man stood up and said, this is the day on which one has desire for meat, and he mentioned something about his neighbors. It seemed that the Prophet I believed him. Then the same man added, I have a young she-goat which is dearer to me than the meat of two sheep. The Prophet permitted him to slaughter it as a sacrifice. I do not know whether that permission was valid only for him or for others as well. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 75. Narrated by Al-Bara bin Azib, the Prophet delivered the khutbah after offering the prayer on the day of Nahr and said, whoever offers the prayer like us and slaughters like us then his nashuk, sacrifice, will be accepted by Allah. And whoever slaughters his sacrifice before the Eid prayer then he has not done the sacrifice. Abi Burda bin Nayar, the uncle of Al-Bara said, O Allah's apostle, I have slaughtered my sheep before the Eid prayer and I thought today as a day of eating and drinking, not alcoholic drinks, and I liked that my sheep should be the first to be slaughtered in my house. So slaughtered my sheep and took my food before coming for the prayer. The Prophet said, the sheep which you have slaughtered is just mutton, not an ashuk. He, Abu Burda, said, O Allah's apostle, I have a young she-goat which is dearer to me than two sheep. Will that be sufficient as an ashuk on my behalf? The Prophet, p.b.u.h, said, yes, it will be sufficient for you but it will not be sufficient, as an ashuk, for anyone else after you. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 76. Narrated by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, the Prophet used to proceed to the musalla on the days of Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. The first thing to begin with was the prayer, and after that he would stand in front of the people and the people would keep sitting in their rows. Then he would preach to them, advise them, and give them orders, i.e. khutbah. And after that, if he wished to send an army for an expedition, he would do so, or if he wanted to give an order, he would do so, and then depart. The people followed this tradition till I went out with Marwan, the governor of Medina, for the prayer of Eid al-Adha or Eid al-Fitr. When we reached the musalla, there was a pulpit made by Kathir bin As-Salt. Marwan wanted to get up on that pulpit before the prayer. I got hold of his clothes, but he pulled them and ascended the pulpit and delivered the khutbah before the prayer. I said to him, "By Allah, you have changed the Prophet's tradition." He replied, "O Abu Sa'id, gone is that which you know." I said, "By Allah, what I know is better than what I do not know." Marwan said, "People do not sit to listen to our khutbah after the prayer, so I delivered the khutbah before the prayer." Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 77. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, Allah's Apostle used to offer the prayer of Eid al-Adha and Eid al-Fitr and then deliver the khutbah after the prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 78. Narrated by Ibn Jurayy, Atta said, Jabir bin Abdullah said, the Prophet went out on the day of Eid al-Fitr and offered the prayer before delivering the khutbah. Atta told me that during the early days of Ibn Zubair, Ibn Abbas had sent a message to him telling him that the adhan for the Eid prayer was never pronounced in the lifetime of Allah's Apostle, and the khutbah used to be delivered after the prayer. Atta told me that Ibn Abbas and Jabir bin Abdullah had said, agree where was no adhan for the prayer of 7 al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. Atta said, I heard Jabir bin Abdullah saying, the Prophet stood up and started with the prayer, and after it he delivered the khutbah. When the Prophet of Allah, p.b.u.h, finished the khutbah, he went to the women and preached to them, while he was leaning on Bilal's hand. Bilal was spreading his garment and the ladies were putting alms in it. I said to Atta, do you think it incumbent upon an imam to go to the women and preach to them after finishing the prayer and khutbah? Atta said, no doubt it is incumbent on imams to do so, and why should they not do so? Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 79. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, I offered the Eid prayer with Allah's Apostle, Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman, and all of them offered the prayer before delivering the khutbah. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 80. Narrated by Ibn Umar, Allah's Apostle, Abu Bakr, and Umar used to offer the two Eid prayers before delivering the khutbah. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 81. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, the Prophet offered a 2-rakat prayer on the day of Eid al-Fitr and he did not pray before or after it. Then he went towards women along with Bilal and ordered them to pay alms, and so they started giving their earrings and necklaces, in charity. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 82. Narrated by Al-Bara bin Azib, the Prophet, p.b.u.h, said, the first thing that we should do on this day of ours is to pray and then return to slaughter the sacrifice. So anyone who does so, he acted according to our sunnah, tradition, and whoever slaughtered the sacrifice before the prayer, it was just meat which he presented to his family and would not be considered as nashuk. A person from the Ansar named Abu Burda bin Nayyar said, O Allah's Apostle, I slaughtered the nashuk before the prayer, but I have a young she-goat which is better than an older sheep. The Prophet, I said, sacrifice it in lieu of the first, but it will be not sufficient, as a sacrifice, for anybody else after you. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 83. Narrated by Said bin Jubair, I was with Ibn Umar when a spear had pierced the sole of his foot and his foot stuck to the paddle of the saddle, and I got down and pulled his foot out, and that happened in Mina. Al-Hajjaj got the news and came to inquire about his health and said, Alas! If we could only know the man who wounded you. Ibn Umar said, You are the one who wounded me. Al-Hajjaj said, How is that? Ibn Umar said, You have allowed the arms to be carried on a day on which nobody used to carry them, and you allowed arms to be carried in the haram even though it was not allowed before. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 84. Narrated by Said bin Amr bin Said bin Al-As, Al-Hajjaj went to Ibn Umar while I was present there. Al-Hajjaj asked Ibn Umar, How are you? Ibn Umar replied, I am all right. Al-Hajjaj asked, Who wounded you? Ibn Umar replied, The person who allowed arms to be carried on the day on which it was forbidden to carry them. He meant Al-Hajjaj. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 85. Narrated by Al-Bara, the Prophet delivered the khutbah on the day of Nahr, Eid al-Adha, and said, The first thing we should do on this day of ours is to pray and then return and slaughter our sacrifices. So anyone who does so, he acted according to our sunnah, and whoever slaughtered before the prayer, then it was just meat that he offered to his family and would not be considered as a sacrifice in any way. My uncle Abu Burda bin Nayyar got up and said, O Allah's Apostle! I slaughtered the sacrifice before the prayer, but I have a young she-goat which is better than an older sheep. The Prophet said, Slaughter it in lieu of the first, and such a goat will not be considered as a sacrifice for anybody else after you. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 86. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, the Prophet said, No good deeds done on other days are superior to those done on these first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah. Then some companions of the Prophet said, Not even jihad. He replied, Not even jihad, except that of a man who does it by putting himself and his property in danger, for Allah's sake, and does not return with any of those things. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 87. Narrated by Muhammad bin Abi Bakr al-Thaqafi, while we were going from Mina to Arafat, I asked Anas bin Malik, about Talbiyah, How did you use to say Talbiyah in the company of the Prophet? Anas said, People used to say Talbiyah and their saying was not objected to, and they used to say Takbir and that was not objected to either. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 88. Narrated by Ahmadiyya, we used to be ordered to come out on the day of Eid and even bring out the virgin girls from their houses and menstruating women so that they might stand behind the men and say Takbir along with them and invoke Allah along with them and hope for the blessings of that day and for purification from sins. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 89. Narrated by Ibn Umar, on the day of Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha, a spear used to be planted in front of the Prophet as a sutra for the prayer, and then he would pray. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 90. Narrated by Ibn Umar, the Prophet used to proceed to the musalla, and an anaza used to be carried before him and planted in the musalla in front of him, and he would pray facing it, as a sutra. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 91. Narrated by Muhammad, Atiyah said, Our Prophet ordered us to come out, on Eid day, with the mature girls and the virgins staying in seclusion. Hafsa narrated the above-mentioned hadith and added, the mature girls or virgins staying in seclusion, but the menstruating women had to keep away from the musalla. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 92. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, I, in my boyhood, went out with the Prophet on the day of Eid al-Fitr or Eid al-Adha. The Prophet prayed and then delivered the khutbah and then went towards the women, preached and advised them and ordered them to give alms. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 93. Narrated by Al-Bara, the Prophet went towards Al-Baqi, the graveyard at Medina, on the day of Eid al-Adha and offered a 2 rakat prayer, of Eid al-Adha, and then faced us and said, on this day of ours, our first act of worship is the offering of prayer and then we will return and slaughter the sacrifice, and whoever does this concords with our sunnah, and whoever slaughtered his sacrifice before that, i.e. before the prayer, then that was a thing which he prepared earlier for his family and it would not be considered as an ashuk, sacrifice. A man stood up and said, O Allah's apostle, I slaughtered the animal before the prayer, but I have a young she-goat which is better than an older sheep. The Prophet, p.b.u.h, said to him, slaughter it. But a similar sacrifice will not be sufficient for anybody else after you. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 94. Narrated by Abdurrahman bin Abi Ibn Abbas was asked whether he had joined the Prophet in the Eid prayer. He said, yes. And I could not have joined him had I not been young. The Prophet came out, till he reached the mark which was near the house of Kuthir bin As-Salt, offered the prayer, delivered the khutbah and then went towards the women. Bilal was accompanying him. He preached to them and advised them and ordered them to give alms. I saw the women putting their ornaments with their outstretched hands into Bilal's garment. Then the Prophet along with Bilal returned home. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 95. Narrated by Ibn Jurayj, Atta told me that he had heard Jabir bin Abdullah saying, the Prophet stood up to offer the prayer of the Eid al-Fitr. He first offered the prayer and then delivered the khutbah. After finishing it he got down, from the pulpit, and went towards the women and advised them while he was leaning on Bilal's hand. Bilal was spreading out his garment where the women were putting their alms. I asked Atta whether it was the zakat of Eid al-Fitr. He said, no, it was just alms given at that time. Some lady put her finger ring and the others would do the same. I said, to Atta, do you think that it is incumbent upon the Imam to give advice to the women, on Eid day? He said, no doubt, it is incumbent upon the Imams to do so and why should they not do so? Al-Hasan bin Muslim told me that Ibn Abbas had said, I joined the Prophet, Abu Bakr, Umar and Uthman in the Eid al-Fitr prayers. They used to offer the prayer before the khutbah and then they used to deliver the khutbah afterwards. Once the Prophet I came out, for the Eid prayer, as if I were just observing him waving to the people to sit down. He, then accompanied by Bilal, came crossing the rows till he reached the women. He recited the following verse, O Prophet! When the believing women come to you to take the oath of fealty to you. To the end of the verse, 60.12. After finishing the recitation he said, O ladies! Are you fulfilling your covenant? None except one woman said, yes. Hassan did not know who was that woman. The Prophet said, then give alms. Bilal spread his garment and said, keep on giving alms. Let my father and mother sacrifice their lives for you, ladies. So the ladies kept on putting their fatks, big rings, and other kinds of rings in Bilal's garment. Abdur Razak said, fatks is a big ring which used to be worn in the pre-Islamic period of ignorance. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 96. Narrated by Ayyub, Hafsa bint Sirin said, on Eid we used to forbid our girls to go out for Eid prayer. A lady came and stayed at the palace of Bani Khalif and I went to her. She said, the husband of my sister took part in 12 holy battles along with the Prophet and my sister was with her husband in 6 of them. My sister said that they used to nurse the sick and treat the wounded. Once she asked, O Allah's apostle, if a woman has no veil, is there any harm if she does not come out on Eid day? The Prophet said, her companion should let her share her veil with her, and the women should participate in the good deeds and in the religious gatherings of the believers. Hafsa added, when Ahmadiyya came, I went to her and asked her, did you hear anything about so and so? Ahmadiyya said, yes, let my father be sacrificed for the Prophet, p.b.u.h. And whenever she mentioned the name of the Prophet she always used to say, let my father be sacrificed for him. He said, virgin mature girls staying often screened, or said, mature girls and virgins staying often screened. Ayub is not sure as which was right, and menstruating women should come out on the Eid day. But the menstruating women should keep away from the musalla. And all the women should participate in the good deeds and in the religious gatherings of the believers. Hafsa said, on that I said to Ahmadiyya, also those who are menstruating. Ahmadiyya replied, yes. Do they not present themselves at Arafat and elsewhere? Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 97. Narrated by Ahmadiyya, we were ordered to go out for Eid, and also to take along with us the menstruating women, mature girls, and virgins staying in seclusion. Ibn on said, or mature virgins staying in seclusion. The menstruating women could present themselves at the religious gathering and invocation of Muslims but should keep away from their musalla. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 98. Narrated by Ibn Umar, the Prophet, p.b.u.h, used to nar or slaughter sacrifices at the musalla, on Eid al-Adha. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 99. Narrated by Al-Bara bin Azib, on the day of Nahr Allah's apostle delivered the khutbah after the Eid prayer and said, anyone who prayed like us and slaughtered the sacrifice like we did then he acted according to our nashuk, tradition of sacrificing, and whoever slaughtered the sacrifice before the prayer, then that was just mutton, i.e. not sacrifice. Abu Burda bin Nayyar stood up and said, O Allah's apostle, by Allah, I slaughtered my sacrifice before I offered the Eid prayer and thought that today was the day of eating and drinking, non-alcoholic drinks, and so I made haste, in slaughtering, and ate and also fed my family and neighbors. Allah's apostle said, that was just mutton, not a sacrifice. Then Abu Burda said, I have a young she-goat and no doubt, it is better than 2 sheep. Will that be sufficient as a sacrifice for me? The Prophet replied, yes. But it will not be sufficient for anyone else, as a sacrifice, after you. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 100. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, Allah's apostle offered the prayer on the day of Nahr and then delivered the khutbah and ordered that whoever had slaughtered his sacrifice before the prayer should repeat it, that is, should slaughter another sacrifice. Then a person from the Ангիր stood up and said, O Allah's apostle, because of my neighbors, he described them as being very needy or poor, I slaughtered before the prayer. I have a young she-goat which, in my opinion, is better than 2 sheep. The Prophet gave him the permission for slaughtering it as a sacrifice. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 101. Narrated by Jundab, on the day of Nahr the Prophet offered the prayer and delivered the khutbah and then slaughtered the sacrifice and said, anybody who slaughtered, his sacrifice, before the prayer should slaughter another animal in lieu of it, and the one who has not yet slaughtered should slaughter the sacrifice mentioning Allah's name on it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 102. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, on the day of Eid the Prophet used to return, after offering the Eid prayer, through a way different from that by which he went. Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 103. Narrated by Urwa, on the authority of Aisha. On the days of Mina, 11th, 12th, and 13th of Dhul Hijjah, Abu Bakr came to her while two young girls were beating the tambourine and the Prophet was lying covered with his clothes. Abu Bakr scolded them and the Prophet uncovered his face and said to Abu Bakr, "Leave them, for these days are the days of Eid and the days of Mina." Aisha further said, "Once the Prophet was screening me and I was watching the display of black slaves in the mosque and, Umar, scolded them. The Prophet said, 'Leave them. O Bani Arfida, carry on, you are safe, protected.'" Sahih Bukhari Volume 2, Book 15, Hadith number 104. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, the Prophet went out and offered a 2-rakat prayer on the day of Eid al-Fitr and did not offer any other prayer before or after it, and at that time Bilal was accompanying him.